everybody out there in Progress Report land, which is Manchester, Auburn, Hooksett, and on the computer. Where do you put down the address for the people on the computer that want to get this show on their computer?
ManchesterTV.org.
That's not that complicated.
No, not complicated at all.
I might be able to figure that out. Our friends in Goffstown keep saying, "Why can't you get this?"
Boy,
show
am I
on?"
glad I remembered that. You put me on the spot. I hadn't. I usually try to prepare for things, and that one came up on me fast.
Yeah,
Bob.
that was
Glad I-
perfect.
Anyway, I missed a couple of weeks here, folks. I'm glad to be back with all of you, and I hope some of you are out there and anxious to participate. It is indeed possible and is indeed encouraged. 640-3091 is the number, and we would welcome you to participate, because tonight we're going to have, I think, a very important topic of discussion. We are joined by my good friend of many years and occasional host here. In fact, pretty much a regular host most months at the first Wednesday of the month.
He's part of the Progress Report team.
He's part of the Progress Report team, and he's none other than Lou D'Alessandro, the Lion of the Senate, the Dean of the Senate, and the Chair of Senate Finance. And we have a lot to discuss because the state budget, $13 billion some odd dollars.
The one we devoted an entire show on a couple of weeks ago.
We
ran 2 weeks to explain to folks how important this
And
budget
how important it was. And what do we know? I think not too many people were surprised, but many were disappointed. The governor vetoed this budget. He vetoed it. So how is the state going to manage in the meantime? Where are we going to get to a compromise that'll put the best elements of this budget into effect? And there were a lot of great things about this budget, as I'm sure Lou is going to tell us. So there's a lot of questions here, and there's nobody with more knowledge, more experience, more insight to help us out with this than Senator Lou D'Alessandro and his many years of distinguished public service. So we've got that. I thought we might just open up, though, with what I thought was a rather stunning result at the,
Oh, yes.
I guess the Governor Council
Governor
did not
Council.
meet at the State House today. I know they were
They met in Littleton, and I happened to be at the meeting.
You were at the meeting?
House. I just happened to be up in Littleton touring
Littleton.
businesses and talking with a number of companies there that are in dire need of help in terms of people.
Yeah.
And wonderful companies, very progressive companies, companies that are doing land office business in terms of economic growth and development, but they need people, and they need some support from the state in terms of the community college system, and the kinds of courses offered at the community college system that will produce the vibrant labor, the skilled labor that's required for these jobs. So it was a wonderful meeting with businessmen in the city. Met with the town manager, the heads of the different companies, and some locals. Representative Hennessy was there, and Representative.
We're hoping she's going to help us on an override of the net metering bill. We'll see.
She
voted the right way on it. If we can hold her to it.
Well, her brother-in-law, Mickey Hennessy, played with me at the University of New Hampshire. He's now in Arkansas. He graduated from UNH, went to Harvard Business School, and wonderful young man. Well, not young man anymore. We're all getting old, but I had a good linkage there. And of course, the Hennessy family has run the Littleton Coin Company forever, and I just saw the expansion of the building. It's just terrific.
Really?
And, it's a wonderful, wonderful building, and the products are certainly outstanding. So I spent the day in Littleton, and I happened to arrive at the council meeting just after the vote was taken. And I must say this, Bob, I served on the executive council for 6 years. I got to vote on a number of judges. I voted against two judges, and I'll say this without one moment's hesitation. The judges I voted against were totally incompetent and did not deserve to be on the bench. I make no bones about that.
You mentioned one to me, and I agree
Yes.
with you, because I had the obligation or the opportunity to practice in front of this judge, and you were dead right.
Well, and I think on the basis of your commitment to public service and your ability to examine candidates based on their qualifications, their education, their demeanor in terms of how they look at the law, how you think that they would interpret the law. I think you really have to make a value judgment, and I think the judgment today made by the council was all wrong.
Yeah. Well, folks, if you haven't heard the news, and maybe you haven't, but it certainly was on Channel 9 earlier, the governor nominated the Attorney General of New Hampshire, a fine young man named, well, younger than us at least,
Right.
Gordon
yourself.
MacDonald. And Gordon is a person I've known for many, many years, and I gather Senator D'Alessandro has known him as well. And I have to agree with Senator D'Alessandro on this. I thought the guy was a perfectly good choice to be the leader of our state Supreme Court, the chief judge. And there was an enormous array of attorneys from both parties that signed letters and petitions in support of him. I think it was like 200 names on there, wasn't
I'm
there?
shocked to find that there are attorneys who would support another attorney. I've never
Right.
heard of such a thing.
Well,
That's a surprise.
they came
Well,
out, they came
on
out of the
Based on that
woodwork.
alone, he
You know,
probably should have walked.
there's a lot of attorneys that would not get that kind of support, and
Right.
we all can be sure of that.
Right. Well, they come out of
there's
the
a
woodwork.
lot.
There's this,
as well.
you know, one of the chief backers of Gordon MacDonald was Jay Sertikowski from the prominent Concord Soloway firm, one of the real, white stocking firms, and generally more Democrats in that firm than Republicans. And Jay is a very strong Democrat, and yet, so there was strong bipartisan support for this nominee, and yet on a purely partisan vote in the Executive Council, he was turned down. And I'd like to hear from you.
There was
'cause-
opposition. I was not disappointed to hear the vote. I wondered how this vote would go. I figured it was in the balance, but I wasn't disappointed. I see this guy as not having any judicial experience. I see him as a political appointee of a very partisan, a Trumpette governor. I see him as a conservative ideologue, and I think we've got enough of that on the court. And I think Sununu is trying to pack the court to put his stamp on it for years to come. And I'm a little bit relieved that we'll take another shot at this one.
Well, I think it's a very good court, to be honest with you. We have Judge Hicks, who's written wonderful opinions.
I would never
I
say
think
a
Judge-
bad word against Gary
I think
Hicks in my
Judge
life.
Hicks is a star on that
Yeah,
bench.
he-
Absolutely. I would
he's-
never say a bad word against
He's
that
a
man.
star, and I think his colleagues have been good judges. I wouldn't say they're in the Kennison mode, but indeed
He was
they're
a
good.
giant. let's
He
face it.
was a giant, and when I think of the number of justices who were on that, I think of John King when he was Chief Justice of the court, who I always had held him in the greatest of esteem. But listen, hey. I think the nominee was very well qualified. I deal with him on a daily basis as the Attorney General of the state of New Hampshire. And let me just say this: nobody works harder. I get there pretty early in the morning and I leave pretty late at night. I don't think there are many people who are in that state house longer than I am. I see him walking out of his office after I do, and I call on him when I have particular questions, and he's right there to address them. He's right on the case. I think he's doing a good job in the AG's office. He's building.
I would say, let's keep him right where he
he's
is.
building it up. Well, he's going to be there, and I hope. I guess I hope he stays. I think.
Well,
he
there's a
would be
chance
good
he could be
judge.
nominated for an associate justice position and then move up to be chief justice, I think.
Well, anything can happen. The governor does have a great deal of latitude as far as that's concerned. And
Yeah.
I think, if you want to talk about the political situation, if the governor didn't have 3 votes, I don't think he should have brought the name forward. It's a terrible embarrassment
Yes,
to
it is.
lose.
Yeah.
So I can think of the Jim Craig incident when Jim was
Yeah.
Commissioner of Labor, and Governor Hassan never brought his name forward because she said he didn't have the votes. I mean, that's happened, and I've been on the council, but
Yeah.
hey,
That did
it is what
surprise
it
me,
is.
frankly, because that's what usually happens when the governor
Yep.
looks around at the council. I haven't got the votes, and then there's a withdrawal.
Does this
graceful
governor
withdrawal.
have the political skills that some of our past governors have had? I mean, this this doesn't, this, again, this scenario where he did this and so publicly, doesn't surprise me either. I feel like
And he
he's
got
made a lot of these
and
blunders.
obviously he suffered a major defeat, which really stung him on the repeal of the death penalty. I mean,
Yeah.
That's you
Yeah.
get my question.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
I think that this governor doesn't have the political savvy that he may be credited with.
Yeah, well, we shall see.
Well, I think in terms of the budget, he didn't have the savvy. I agree with you. This is a budget that he should not have vetoed. And
He's got a lot of constituents that he's just slapped in the face.
He certainly does, and all of the people of New Hampshire are his constituents.
That's
We're-
right.
We're all
That's
part
right.
of the
We
deal.
all are.
And indeed, this budget, I've been chairman of the Finance Committee 3 times. The first 2 times, I wouldn't sign the budget because I thought it was lousy, to be honest with you. And one time the budget passed, the other time the budget went through without the governor's signature. I signed this budget because I thought it was the best budget that I've seen in the last decade. It did more for people, did more for the communities, and the reason is that we had some financial resources. We were able to do that for the first time in a long time, and this did it. And when you think about each area of the budget, let's talk about mental health, health and human services, let's talk about safety, talk about transportation,
Education.
talk about education. I mean, all of these areas were covered, and I think done well. I think Mary Jane Wallner, who was chairman of the House Finance Committee, did a very good job, and she chaired the Committee of Conference. The House does that. I give her kudos for bringing it all together, and when you look at the things that were added during the process, some very positive things
And
were
a lot of
were
things,
brought
important
forward.
things given away as well to arrive
Yes.
at the compromise.
Right.
This was not easy.
Right. There's no question that many concessions were made to the governor, and I say this, and again, I was there. He got everything he wanted. To be honest with you, the only thing that he says he didn't want was the reduction in the tax, or the stabilization of the rate at 7.9%. Indeed, that was easy to work with. I mean, I think that concession could have been made on the part of the governor, but he drew a red line in the sand, and he said he wouldn't go beyond that. I think that was foolishness on his part, because there were so many things in that budget that he wanted and that he fought for. I mean, no capital gains, very significant issue. Significant issue.
Yeah, I hated to see you all in the Senate give up on that, frankly, but I understand it.
Well, I think we were able to put together a substantial budget without it.
Yeah.
And we knew it was a break point as far as the governor was concerned, and paid family leave. I mean,
That's the one that
issue.
really must hurt.
That was
So many of us
hard
have
to do.
been hoping that would be part of the New Hampshire law for so
for a
long.
long time, and that
It's
was
passed in
that was
Massachusetts.
set aside, and I think there is a little caveat that says it will continue to be looked at, and there is money in there to continue the research on paid family leave. But again, another concession to the governor, the SPU, a concession to the governor.
Psychiatric
The
Unit.
Secure Psychiatric Unit.
Because, folks, if you don't know, this is a bit of jargon, but probably people who watch this report probably do know. We've been housing people with a severe psychiatric conditions that make themselves dangerous to themselves or others in the state prison when they have not been convicted of any crime.
Right.
So they've been in a criminal justice setting when they have not been part of the criminal justice system. And there's many people, including my dear friend Rennie Cushing, that have been very upset about this and worked very hard on it. And the governor did propose that we build a separate SPU
Right.
unit, I presume be on the grounds of the state hospital, and this budget did contain some money for that.
Right. This budget funded it with 26 beds. It also cleared out the children out of New Hampshire Hospital so that we could create 48 more beds for people who are held in emergency rooms who need help and who need it immediately. And we took the children out of New Hampshire Hospital where they didn't belong in the first place.
Right.
And 10 years ago, when we closed the Philbrook Center, there should have been another institution created for these
Yes,
kids.
so they didn't have to be mixed in with the adult
Well,
population.
and didn't have the amenities, didn't have the playground, didn't
Yeah.
have the place
Yeah.
to. So all of those things were given to the governor. In the area of health and human services, the number of beds, the transition beds that were created, all of these things were in direct response to the 10-year health plan, in direct response, and done with good thought process and with a lot of hard work. Cindy Rosenthal did a lot of hard work on our side, and I think on the other side. So when you look at the situation, almost everything that the governor wanted was in the budget. And on the outside, we gave an increase to the retired workers. They got a COLA for the first time in 10 years. It was only 1.5%. It was structured so that those 50,000 or below got it.
And there was so
But-
much more, wasn't there, Lou?
Oh,
and
yes.
the municipal aid, and I would
Oh,
like
yeah.
to ask you to invite you to talk particularly about helping our school districts fund their educational needs. I mean, it was so sad to hear that woman from Berlin say.
Oh, absolutely. And after we did it, I called her in Berlin. I called the chairman of the school board. I called the mayor of Berlin. I said, we addressed your concerns. You came down and told us what the problem was. We addressed it. We addressed it by taking the stabilization and putting it back. Instead of a 4% decrease, you got the money back. And in terms of rounding it out, $80 million more went into education. So we addressed that need, and we listened to the people at the public hearing, both the public hearing in Concord and the public hearing in Manchester. So as I said, we addressed everything that the governor wanted, and we addressed what most people wanted. Now, does everybody want more? Sure. Is enough ever enough? No, it's never enough. But indeed, we did more than had been done in the last decade.
So what, we talked about the line in the sand
Yes.
on
The taxes?
taking out the decrease in the business taxes that was going to go into effect.
Which has now gone into effect.
And will now
Right.
go into effect.
It's
And
gone
I
into
want to talk
effect.
about that later in
Right.
another segment of the show, what
Sure.
we live with now
Right.
because of the continuing resolution.
Right.
And I'll also ask why we had to do that. But what was, how could it be that the governor would veto such a good bill based on this one thing? I'm asking you to get inside of his head, but look at his veto statement. Explain to us what he was looking for that he didn't get.
Well, I think he was obviously looking for the taxes to remain at the same level. That was a key ingredient because he said there'll be no tax increase. And the perception that was created is if you stayed at 7.9 rather than dropping it to 7.7, because it had been in law dropped to 7.7, it was a tax increase. And you did that both in the BPT and the BET. So that was his, I think that was his line in the
So
sand.
to protect fat cat business owners.
Well, I think to
And I know it's
yeah,
not
yeah,
all fat
yeah,
cat
right.
business owners,
Well,
but I'm
but I think his point was he wanted to protect business. But our counter to
Did he want
that,
to do that, or did he want the political advantage of being able to say, "I'm fighting to keep the business tax
Well,
cuts that were scheduled"?
I think that's a very salient point. But we gave him the answer to that: conformity, as far as taxes are concerned. We would make New Hampshire law conform to federal legislation. That's a great plus for us because it helps us in terms of revenue. But we also produced market-based sourcing and single sales factor. He wanted both of these things. Business wanted both of these things. Both of these things play into the tax situation. So indeed, if you kept it at 7.9, these new reforms as far as taxes were concerned made a big difference for business and industry, things that they wanted and he wanted. And he wanted them. And you can go even further, and that'll happen in the next sessions of the legislature. But indeed, here's another situation where 7.9 7.7, that de minimis amount of money. And on the BET side, very de minimis amount of money. Made no difference. I talked to people today in business and industry in the Littleton area, and I said, what about 7.9, 7.7? What they said to me is, if we could get qualified workers, that's really what we want.
Yeah.
We want skilled workers.
We hear that time and time again.
Yeah,
It's
who-
not
who
it's
can
not
do the
tax
job.
breaks.
Yeah, it's all over.
It's not tax breaks for,
Yeah, it's skilled workers
it's skilled
in
workers.
that
It's the
environment.
lack of workers that are able to do the job, and the workforce housing that would make it possible for them to come here and do the job.
Right. And we put $5 million in the budget for workforce housing.
In
Pretty
exchange for
substantial.
0.2% change in the tax rate.
Exactly. And again, I don't think the governor's a bad guy. I want to emphasize that. But I want to say that I think he was very short-sighted in this situation, because this document helped people in New Hampshire. Now, I talk about the D'Alessandro Revenue Redistribution Plan, Brother Backus, and I was able, with the help of my colleagues, to get $20 million a year to go back to the communities with no strings attached. Now, grant it's a one-time expenditure, but $20 million a year to go back. The communities could spend it any way they wanted to.
Fill budget holes.
Yes, exactly.
Or
Fill
lower
potholes.
property taxes.
Fill
Or
potholes.
you could
Do
or both.
whatever. Do whatever. But
Yeah.
again, I think we were being creative. We were being realistic, and we did have some money. And if a state has some money, they should give it back to the people. All right, this was an attempt to do that. And at the same time, we put more money into the revenue stabilization account. We increased it. We would have, we at the end of our budget, we would have had almost $125 million in the revenue stabilization account. Now, remember, that was only $9 million just a few years ago. So you got to give credit.
Is that the rainy day fund?
Yes, the rainy
Okay.
day fund. So all of these things were present. And he didn't have to sign it. He could have let it become law without his signature. And he could have taken executive action if he didn't think part of it was good. He could have held up on certain things. But by passing the continuing resolution, as we did, I think we've created chaos.
Not to mention making it more difficult to come up with a budget that
Oh,
will
yeah.
work.
No
you know,
question.
When we come down the
Yeah,
road.
you gotta work like hell to make it happen.
Well,
So-
we're at our 20-minute mark, I think.
Well, we're a little long on it, actually. Let's take a quick break if we can, Brandon, and we'll regroup and we'll come back, and we want to talk about, here's the problems. Lou D'Alessandro's laid it out very clearly and passionately and with good reason. Now we have to think about where we go from here. Well, that's what we'd like to talk about when we come back. We do have an continuing resolution, but we don't want to give up on the good things this budget was good do for our state and make us a much more wonderful place to live and with a better economic future. So we'll be right back. Hello, folks. This is the second segment of this week's progress report here in the getting on toward the middle of July of this very welcome summer. And we are very pleased to have with us the Dean of the Senate, the Chair of Senate Finance, and occasional host on this show. Always welcome, Senator Lou D'Alessandro. And we have been discussing the fact that the governor vetoed the state budget. You know, the first year of any term, every term has 2 sessions. The first year of any term, most of the oxygen in the room is taken up with fashioning the state budget. It takes an incredible amount of work by the folks on Senate Finance, led by Lou, and in the House, led by Representative Mary Jane Wallner. This time, they labored long and hard, and they produced a budget that at least Lou and I think everybody on the committees of conference signed on to this budget. Of course they did, because that's required. So this went forward with a lot of impetus and a lot of hard work, and the governor vetoed it, and that's put us in a position where there's a lot of uncertainty going forward. But one of the things we know for sure, because it's already operating, is we have a continuing resolution. When you don't have a budget, because the governor's vetoed it, and Lou just told me this has happened. This is the 4th time this happened, so it's not unprecedented. When that happens, you'd be well advised, and we were advised and did, to have a continuing resolution so the government doesn't come to a grinding halt, which we've seen at the federal level. We don't see it in New Hampshire.
Right.
And so, Lou, talk to us about the continuing resolution and how long it is and what's going to happen in the meantime. And
Yeah, I mean, there's a July 1 deadline.
Yes, that's correct.
It's a hard deadline. You can't get around it.
Yeah, we had to have a hard deadline. And both the House and the Senate, and with the concurrence of the governor, signed a continuing resolution, passed a continuing resolution. The continuing resolution was to last for 3 months. It said that you would spend at 1/12 of the 2019 adjusted authorized budget. 2019, that's the last
That
budget.
big word,
we had.
adjusted.
Adjusted authorized, right. So think of this as a homeowner. You were told by your wife or your husband that you had to divide your life into 12 parts. And each one of those 12 parts had to be equal. You couldn't spend any more money in the second than you did in the first. Well, that's impossible. State government can't work that way.
Bills
But-
come in at different rates.
Right, and you need different spending. What if debt service all of a sudden came up? A high number for debt service. You have to pay that. What about the education money, the adequacy grants? That's more than 1/12. There's a significant amount of money that has to be paid. Just 2 examples. What about the pay raise that wasn't included in the 19 budget? It will have to be paid for with lapse money. Now, the lapse money usually is used to help with going forward with another budget, but it will be used this time to pay the pay
Define
raise.
lapse money. Lapse money is what's left
Okay,
after expenses.
right. Lapse money is when you do your budget and the government says, as it has for years and years and years, there will be a 3% lapse. That means 97% of the money appropriated can be spent, but 3% has to be in reserve and lapsed. Now, at one time, lapses were counted as revenue until the accountants, the geniuses that they are, said, you can't do that. It's not revenue. You can't count revenue twice. You can't count the same dollar twice. So lapses are included in every budget we've ever put together, and the lapses are usually at 3%. But it's the money that you were appropriated that you couldn't spend. And as I said, that's going to be used for the pay raise, because the pay raise was put in late in the game.
we have contractual obligations for it.
Yes, we have contractual obligation that says that it has to be done. But what about the hiring? And people are needed. We know we need people in certain areas. You don't hire them, 3 1 on the first month, 3 in the second, 3 in the third. No, if you're hiring 50 people, you try to hire them as quickly as you can. Under a program like this, you got to phase them in. Well, sometimes we phase them in, but this mandates that you phase them in. And all of these things have to be be plugged in. All of this has got to be created. Admin services has to go to the computer and put all this data in for these 3 months.
So that the budget has some numbers in it, so that these
Right, so that
department heads
everybody
know what they
knows
have.
what they have and what they can spend. I believe the most serious situation is federal matches. For example, we talked about increases in provider payments. Those increases are a 50-50 match from the federal government. We allotted $62 million in general fund money to be matched, but $62 million in federal money. We aren't going to be able to do
Does this
that.
include the pay increases for our reimbursement rates for Medicaid and things like that?
Not necessarily. These provider payments, we set a standard, we set a payment level. HHS sets a payment level. We were going to increase that payment level by 3.1% in the first year and 3.1% in the second year. It covers a variety of provider payments. And you know, when the lobbyists come, you know who's going to get it.
Contract services.
Right, contract services,
For the state.
things of
Okay,
this.
yeah.
And for the first time in 10 years, I got into the budget foster grandparents and congregate care. Now, neither one of those can be implemented because they're new items. They weren't in the 19 budget. So things like that,
Just don't get happening.
they don't happen. The $3.4 million we put in for Granite Shield, which wasn't in the 19 budget because it was an appropriation that came later.
Yeah.
We still need the money. We still have
That
the
expense
problem.
will be incurred.
Yeah, well, it'll be incurred, and who's going to pay for it? You're going to have to juggle to pay for it. So all of these things, the federal government has run without a budget for so long that it's almost sickening to think of it. They do continuing resolution after continuing resolution after
Yeah.
continuing resolution. And Warren Rudman, God rest his soul, added sequestration to the fact if you can't get a budget, you got to go to the sequester process. He told me that would never happen. We'll always do a budget. Well, Warren, you were wrong in that context
certainly were.
because it has happened. So all of these problems exist with a continuing resolution. But the most important thing, in my opinion, is that the cities and towns aren't going to get the additional dollars that they need.
And a lot of them have already passed budgets,
Yes.
kind of hoping or counting on that
Right.
money to come in.
With great expectations, absolutely. And now that they have to deal with that. So we'll do what we can. We're going to meet, the conferees will meet 3 times in the month of August, each time to go over certain segments of the budget, and it looks like we have a date
Will they
set.
meet with the governor or just with the
Well,
conferees?
the conferees will meet, and there'll be a public session so people can come in and comment.
What's the goal, Senator? Is the goal to persuade the governor to change his mind on the current budget? Is the goal to nibble away at the fringes to try to come up with something that he might be able to save face and sign? What's the goal of this process? And I'm not leading. I'm asking because I don't know.
Well, I think it's a good question. The goal is to come up with a budget that addresses the needs of the people that the governor will sign. All right, is there leeway? There's got to be leeway now because some of the things in this budget aren't going to work anymore. The time frame is too long. The 7.9 will now have been reduced to 7.7, 3 months longer. So instead of the 6 months, it's 9 months. More and more people have now paid at 7.7 or have done anticipated payments. So that has to be dealt with.
That's the business taxes that
That's
we
the
talked
business
about that are
taxes.
gonna
That has
be
to be dealt
reduced.
with. And you got to, look at the revenue projection, see what's been coming in. There's a lot of things now that will come into play. So we've got to come up with a reasonable compromise that addresses everything good that was done in this budget and gets the governor to agree with it. And that's not easy, as you know.
When do we start talking to the governor? I mean, it's
Well,
great
I hope tomorrow.
tomorrow.
Yeah, we've
Have
put
you
it-
had any feelings put out from the governor's office that he's ready to talk?
I have not, but we put in a request I think the Speaker of the House requested that we meet tomorrow with the governor sometime after 11 in the morning. So we're all ready to do that and ready to talk with him. That's out there. That request is out there because we want to get going with this as quickly as we can.
And Senator, what happens at a meeting like that? You sit down. I assume the finance chairs of both houses. Will the Speaker be there and the President of the Senate, or how big of a delegation?
I think at this meeting it'll be the President of the Senate, the Speaker of the House Chair, and the Senate Finance Chair. Four people. That's my perception at this point in time. I mean, you got to make a meeting that's effective and manageable, and
Right.
and it can't include a cast of thousands, which causes chaos. So I think that'll be the meeting.
And so what happens? The governor comes and kind of clarifies his position? Does someone make an offer? Again, I'm asking because this is a new thing. How does this happen?
Don't know. Never done this before. When I chaired finance in the past and I didn't sign off on the budget, I was totally excluded from the process that went forward.
You get replaced.
I got replaced.
So somebody that will sign it can step in.
Somebody that will sign it will step in, and I looked at those who signed it, and it's firm in my mind.
Yeah.
I was out to pasture. I was thrown out
We'll
because
have to get you back in to ask
thank
about it.
you.
What would happen?
I'll have to make a guess. I think we'll talk about. Listen, where's the common ground? We've got to get this done. There are needs that manifest themselves, and they're rising to the top. But we've got to get this done, and we've got to get the governor to listen. We have to listen. and we've gotta
obviously,
come to
there's one
something.
thing you could do. You could give the governor his next round of reductions in the business taxes.
Yep.
And say that's okay. Why is that? Is that something you think is possibly the outcome? And how much revenue does that deprive us of to meet these needs?
That's an excellent question. It deprives us of $90 million in revenue that we'd be counting on.
Yeah.
So you'd have to make an adjustment here of
You'd have to give up on some of the priorities that
Yeah.
were funded in this budget.
Yes, you would.
Yeah.
Because you'd have to reduce the spend by the $90 million you won't be getting.
Yeah.
But I think there are other things that can be done.
Yeah.
And,
Like what,
well,
for example?
I think you can make little adjustments. As I said, the items that we call our tax reform package might produce better. We might be able to produce better numbers there. We may do something with the BET to make it a little bit stronger. I mean, that would help offset the BPT losses. And remember, the BPT, there's a pyramid, and the greatest amount of money is paid by very few businesses.
Right.
All right. When you get to that bottom, there are many businesses that don't pay. But the BET, everybody pays. So
Yeah.
could you do something with that? I mean, all of these are things that we all should be
Yeah.
thinking about as we speak.
Well, you raised one point that I think our viewers may not completely understand. I'm not sure I do.
Okay.
And you talked about, we were going to help businesses with conformity, and
Yes.
achieving conformity with the new
Right,
federal tax law.
Right.
Can you explain what that means?
Yes.
What's conformity?
Yeah. We do not conform to the federal tax laws. The federal tax laws that pass, all right, if you're in conformity, your tax laws coincide with any changes that are made.
So you're talking about the most
Yes.
recent tax.
Yeah, well, we
Big tax,
will conform based on the 2018 tax laws.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, we're conforming to the 2005 tax laws. So everything that happened in between, we aren't conforming to that. Many states have rolling conformity. Every time there's a change, they make a change.
Just automatically.
Yeah, automatically.
Yeah.
We haven't done that
Yeah.
in New Hampshire, and I've fought this for years in the process. We have said we're going to conform to a certain number and at a certain point in time, and let's use 25 as the point in time. But by conforming to the 2018, we're going to conform to the most recent changes in the federal tax laws.
And does that make it easier for a businessman and the bookkeeper and the accountant to get their tax returns prepared because they mirror each other?
That's a good way to put it.
Generally
Yeah,
speaking.
yeah, generally speaking, that's a good way to put it. Yes, and it's good for us. And remember that there are always pluses and minuses in this situation. But in this particular situation, and because of the repatriation that took place based on the federal tax changes, we gained about $100 million in revenue.
Yeah.
And had
Yeah.
we been total conformity, we would have gotten $200 million.
So it's a big number.
It's a huge number. It's a huge number.
This year.
This year.
Another year, it could be different.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah,
it's,
sure,
it's,
sure. Listen, it's
you
that
take the
kind
good
of,
with the bad.
It's that kind of a game.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
there's no question. You gotta take the good with the bad. But indeed, what you try to do is to try to structure your laws so that you get the best possible result. And we got DRA in the process. That's the Department of Revenue Administration, working with us to give us the kind of information that we need. Now, generally speaking, we would have outside people contracted to help us in determining what the future holds. What's the economic situation really like, and how can we get into it? We don't do that. We depend on ourselves. We bring in people, House Ways and Means, Senate Ways and Means. We do the job ourselves. We do it internally. And I think we do a pretty good job.
Yeah, the record's pretty good.
The record is pretty good. But when you talk about sophisticated changes that are taking place, and these changes are taking place all over the country. 31 states have market-based sourcing. We've got to conform because we've got to stay in the game with the other states in the United States. But getting back to our budget, I think the quality of the budget is indicated by the number of people who support the budget. Now, I recognize the fact that no Republicans voted for it in the Senate, and no Republicans, to the best of my knowledge, voted for it in the
I
House.
think that's true.
But that was purely a political situation. Those who went through this budget, line by line, know full well the positives of this budget. And everybody got a little bit out of this budget. We're all concerned about health and human services. There are so many good things about health and human services, and everybody cries about it. Oh, we got to do more. We got to do more in the opioid crisis, right? We've got to do
Mental
we've got to
health.
do more. Mental health.
And then you do something, and
And
the
you
governor
do
vetoes it.
something, and the governor vetoes it. But everybody knew. I thought we had the most open process that I've seen in a long time. The Senate had its public hearing in Concord, and we had a public hearing in Manchester. Every person in attendance spoke. There wasn't one person who wasn't given the opportunity to speak, both in Concord and in Manchester. And I know because I chaired those meetings. And they went on, and I understand that, but you got to give the public their due. So the public input was extremely important in building this document. You know, and
Senator, there were Republicans on the Finance Committee.
Yes.
There were Republicans on the House Finance
Yes.
Committee. There were Republicans on the Committee of Conference, weren't there?
yes. On the Senate side, Senator
So
Reagan was on, and on the,
Now, on the Committee of Conference, everybody has to sign off, don't they? Or am I mistaken in that?
well, everybody has to sign off who's a conferee at the time the decisions are made. If a Republican refuses to sign, they take themselves off and are replaced. That was the case in the Senate, and I think it was the case in the House.
It was indeed.
Yeah, because everybody has to sign the document,
Yeah,
and it had to be
Yeah.
signed by 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
yeah.
So we got it done.
It's a sad state of affairs, and I tell you, I have to say, Senator Lou, the more you talk about this with all the knowledge and expertise and time you've given to this, the more it seems to me it's hard to explain the governor's decision as anything but raw political expediency, and you do that Republican mantra. You know, the Republicans have taken, on the floor of the House, I don't know if you heard on the floor of the Senate, but on the floor of the House, they're taken to describing taxes as theft.
Well.
Taxes are theft. So anything you can do to cut taxes, in this case we're talking about business tax cuts of small amount that were scheduled to go into effect that would have been suspended under this budget, but now go into effect under the continuing resolution. I mean, if that's your attitude, then you're just, you know, I mean, it's just dreadful. I mean, I just don't understand where the virulence of the anti-tax fervor in this country comes from, because it says in the IRS building in Washington, D.C., and it's a great quote. taxes are the price we pay to live in a civilized society. Live in a society with no taxes, and you'll find out what life is like. It'll be nasty, Brutus, and short.
Well, it's, people like to freeload. And if
Well,
they can get
But
something-
this is the mantra, and I have to think the governor just caved into that.
I haven't
can't
had a
think this-
fire at my house in 10 years. Why should I pay for a fire
Well,
department?
but, to address that, there were no new taxes in this bill.
Well, that's not the way the governor's seeing
I
it.
understand it, but.
Well,
the- but
that's the same twisted logic. The Republicans have been using that,
With the House-
stopping a tax cut is a tax increase.
Yeah, well, right, I mean, but,
Well-
there was a house tax that was gonna go into this bill. It was a capital gains tax. I thought it was a pretty damn good idea.
I thought it was a great idea.
It was,
Except the
we
rate
haven't-
wasn't high enough.
But, Lou D'Alessandro saw it right away and he didn't like it, and it didn't happen. So there was no reason there for this veto. I mean,
No. There was no capital gains tax.
No capital
And
gains
I got to
tax.
tell you, that's as we began the show, I said there were a lot of concessions made.
Yes.
And pulling that out almost from the get-go was a huge concession.
Yeah.
That was and is a very popular proposition.
Well,
And
It,
Anyway,
it's-
I think we maybe should take another quick break. We haven't got, we're going long here, folks.
And then we can
And I-
focus for
And
the
I'm
last
hoping we
minute.
come back, some of you out there will choose to join in and challenge Lou if you want to.
Sure, happy
Good luck
to.
with that, he knows his stuff. But call in by any means and give us your praise or your criticism, and participate if you want. We'll be right back, because we have a few other things we want to talk about beyond the budget, I think. Hey, folks, if you're just joining us, this is the progress report for this July 10th. And what is now such a welcome summer. Summer seems to be so short here in the
it
Northeast.
finally
doesn't
showed
it?
up.
it did.
It certainly
came,
did. It's
Came out of the blue.
Yeah.
And it's been some wonderful weather for the July 4th weekend, and I hope you all had a
Yep.
wonderful one. And we've been very fortunate to have with us our usual first Wednesday of the month host, Lou D'Alessandro. And we've been talking about the budget that was worked on so hard by Senator Lou and his colleagues in Senate Finance and in the House side as well. and which the governor vetoed. And that's put us in really quite a conundrum. And I hope you've heard that discussion. And if you haven't, I hope you'll listen to the rebroadcast of this show, which comes on 5 times, as you know. So you can be out there and you can learn a lot about this. And it's something, as Lewis said frequently, the budget of New Hampshire is the number one thing we do in a term. And it affects every citizen of the state.
Yep.
You may not think it does, but you look at these things, you will find somewhere in there there's a budget that's important to you, whether it's for the education of your children, you got somebody with a mental health problem, you got a criminal justice issue.
Affects your local tax rate.
It's your local tax rate, exactly.
Yes.
And they say we don't have a broad-based tax. Well, the property tax is pretty broad-based. And the things that generally we don't fund at the state level, and when there's veto, there will be some of those costs are going to end up on the local property tax. So,
Well, and we saw that
everybody's got a stake in
back
this.
in the O'Brien days, and we're still trying to recover from that. And this budget would have helped us recover from all that downshifting at least a little bit. And of course, it gets vetoed.
I think that's a great point that people ought to recognize. O'Brien almost destroyed the state. He came
we
very
remember.
close to destroying the state. The reductions he made in the budget process were just almost catastrophic, or almost brought the state to its knees. Thankfully, he didn't come back. And boy, you talk about fate. Had he made one decision, he would have been back, and we would have been in worse trouble. But he made the decision about how you cast the ballot. Do you recall that?
I don't. Tell
Well,
me.
do you remember when he said secret ballot or open ballot?
Oh, yes, of course I do.
Secret ballot or
Yeah,
open ballot?
yes, now I know what you're talking
Right.
about.
And
That was one of the most stunning days I've ever spent in the House.
It was stunning, and as a result, he lost.
He lost it.
He
Yeah.
lost it.
He overplayed his hand.
He
He
did.
had the caucus vote to come back as speaker.
Right.
And the Republicans had the majority, and almost inevitably, probably never happened before, if you win the caucus vote and your party's in the majority, your caucus
Right,
choice
you're
is
in.
going to be the speaker. He managed to lose that vote. That was incredible.
Yeah, and Sean
Incredible.
Jasper
And Sean Jasper, who
rose.
was a very conservative Republican in his own right, but not Bill O'Brien.
Not
thank
out of
goodness.
his mind.
Not out of his
not out
mind.
of his mind.
Yeah.
And as fate would have it, who cast the deciding vote in the Affordable Care Act? But Sean Jasper,
Yeah.
right? Who
He
made,
did.
That's right.
And he gave us his word he would do it, and he
Yep,
kept his
and
word.
He kept his word. So
He's now the
Yeah.
Secretary of Agriculture.
Agriculture,
Good,
so
good
kudos.
going there, John. We,
Sean, you're in the.
You're all right.
Right,
You're all right,
right,
John.
right.
We
You got a
disagree.
plus, you got a plus.
We disagree on many things, but you're all right.
Right.
And now we hear that Mr. O'Brien is probably going to run for Senate against
Yes,
Jeannie
I
Shaheen.
understand that. That's really something.
That's really something.
Certainly stark contrast setting up right there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Very stark.
There shouldn't be much doubt in people's mind as to which way they want to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think the lesson that should be learned is how important the budget is.
Yeah.
And
Budgets
how
are
important-
policy.
It's the most important thing we do in the
Right.
whole biennium.
There's
No
no
question about it.
It is the most important thing we do.
Yep.
And it affects everybody in the state of New Hampshire.
But I would just like to say, this is the most important veto that we've had.
Yes.
But there are other vetoes, and there are many more to come.
Yep.
And a lot of the good work that was done in the Senate, and if I may say so, in the House, including the committee I chair, Science, Technology, and Energy, and in the Senate side, the Energy Environment Committee chaired by Senator Martha Fuller Clark, we passed a lot of good bills, and many of these are going to be vetoed. Some of them have already been. And the one that is particularly most concerning to me right now, they're all of concern, but the one most concerning to me is veto to the bill that we passed by overwhelming majorities in both houses, I think by voice vote in the Senate, to increase the net metering cap from 1 to 5 megawatts. So that communities like say, Manchester, with that
Yeah.
Mount Manchester on the, Dunbarton Road, which used to be the landfill, they're not going to turn it into garden apartment, folks. What could it be used for? How about some solar
Solar
panels?
array that could feed the
Solar
city's,
panels. They could have
electric
enough
needs.
solar panels there to generate probably pretty close to 5 megawatts. And the mayor's very interested in having that happen. The city government's interested, and we think that should happen. But to do that, we've got to override the governor's veto of that bill. And that veto was based on a very false premise that somehow this net metering was going to cost people that didn't do solar more on their electric bills. Not true. Just not true. Absolutely not true. Solar power helps everybody lower costs because it cuts down the peak demand. you know, the peak demand's going to come up one of these days in August when it's really hot and the
Right.
sun's
Blistering.
blistering and everybody's got their air conditioning
Right.
on.
You got
And
it.
that's when the demand goes up, and that's when you turn on the most expensive and the most polluting plants.
Right.
And they happen to be the same. The most expensive are the most polluting. And that's, so you have bad air and you have high costs. Solar can help with that, and this bill can help generate solar. It won't only come from towns like, cities like Manchester, and particularly Nashua. Nashua's got a tremendous hydro potential
Yes.
down there. And
Yeah.
they are very anxious to have this cap lifted so they can maximize the productivity of their hydro in Mines Falls, and I forget what the other is.
You know, Bob, I could never understand why they put a cap on net meter. What does the cap accomplish other than to prop up PSN, EverSource? I mean, it seems to me that the
Well-
consumer gets no benefit from that.
Well, the feeling is that if you let anybody of any size do it, then you kind of overwhelm. I don't know. You know.
I don't either. That's why I'm asking.
I'm gonna have to. I can't bullshit my way through this, Mike. I'm not sure. I should know the answer to this. I have known the answer.
Right.
It's not coming to me right now, but I'll find out and I'll bring you the answer.
Fair enough. But before we
It has to
close
do.
out-
It has to do with the way wholesale generators
Right.
contribute power through the
Right.
ISO New England.
Right.
That's what it is about.
Where the
Yeah, it
excess
sounds like
power
inside
goes.
baseball to
yeah,
me.
yeah. I mean,
Where the excess power goes and the cost of the price
Yeah.
you pay for the excess power.
so there's one. There's another one that we passed that Jeb Bradley worked on heroically in the last minute thing to attach to a Senate bill to, you know, again, try and support the 6 biomass wood plants that are now shut down
Yeah.
because they're not making it in the market. And there's a whole ton of reasons why we would like to not lose this resource, because it's, number one, it's renewable.
and
It's
it-
not
it's good for the
absolutely-
logging industry.
It's not absolutely
Right.
clean, but it's relatively clean. It doesn't put out carbon. And it supports the timber industry, which is a very important part of New Hampshire and has always been in our history. So those are some of the things that we have.
But Bob, the big one, where we're going to have a meeting tomorrow at 11 o'clock, what should people watching this show do? I know
There
what
you
I
go.
think I
That's
should
right,
do.
yeah.
Before
That's
we
right.
go,
Let's
let's
make
find out.
that
I mean,
clear
what can
before
we
we run out
do
of
to
time.
apply the kind of pressure that might be effective and
Well,
help you in your negotiating?
I think people should call the governor's office, call their representative, call their senator, and be adamant in the fact that they would like this budget passed.
There you go. Be active. Write a letter to the editor.
Be very active.
And now's the time to
Call.
do it.
Yes.
Now's the time when the iron is hot. You have to strike when the iron is hot.
Right.
The negotiations are about to begin, and if the governor's switchboard is flooded with a bunch of people,
How much, Lou, just to wrap up, because we're running out of time, how much would this budget have done for the city of Manchester, both for our schools and the city?
This budget would have brought about $15 million more into the city of Manchester.
$15 million more into the city of Manchester.
I defy anyone to say that we don't need
That's
that
a
money.
big number,
Right.
folks, and that's a big chunk, and we should have that money. And it was provided in the budget the governor
Well,
vetoed.
the money's there, and it
Yep.
belongs to the people.
Yep. Okay. Well, that's real good. Thanks, Lou, for coming in.
Oh,
and
thank you.
You are such an expert, and you've given so many hours, years and years of many hours.
I can't believe the
serving the
frustration.
people of New
You
Hampshire.
come up with a masterpiece
Yeah.
like this, and,
And,
only to have
there
it
it
shot
is.
down based on a.
Folks,
Kudos.
I'll be away for the next couple of weeks, but I think Mike Farley will be handling
I'll do what I
things here.
can to hold down the fort.
And I'll be back with some
May see some
tales of
reruns,
my
who knows?
adventures traveling across the country by train. So
Wow.
I'll look forward to seeing you all back here then. Take care and enjoy this beautiful evening and the rest of this month and the rest of the summer.
See you next week, folks.